Yeah, I'm just talking nonsense now, aren't I? I'm going to cut this bit. Before I go on, there are a couple of people I'd also like to thank who've been spreading the word about this podcast. The first is Caroline from Knits, and as I was talking about her podcast last month, she was talking about mine, so thank you, Caroline, much appreciated. And also Denise of Dear Designs has also mentioned me to her viewers, so thank you very much. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast. My name is Leslie, also known as Knitting or Death on Ravelry, Instagram, Twitter, pretty much all the social medias. And thank you very much for stopping by. This is a knitting, crochet and general yarn craft podcast recorded on the south of England. Really grateful for you being here, whether you're a new viewer or returning, thank you. To those who have watched previous episodes, thank you for hitting buttons, liking, subscribing, commenting. I do try to reply to every comment. Sometimes I miss them, I am but human, but I really do try to, so thank you very much. They are so appreciated, you've no idea. On Ravelry there is a Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast group. Not a lot going on there. Possibly going to do a knit along in the new year, but we'll see on that. But by all means come along, introduce yourself, and if there are any questions that you'd like me to answer, then please put them on there and I'll do my best to answer them. I record throughout the month and then put everything together for the end of the month. So you'll see me in various locations, in various items of clothing, including this very bright but very warm number. It's quite a chilly grey day today, so I thought I'd get one of the thicker sweaters out. This was my own design, knitted. The main body was knitted side to side, and then I just did the sleeves kind of side to side as well, if you see what I mean. I started kind of here and then knitted round that way, using up excuse me, as you can probably tell, some Noro, and I can't remember which one, but I'll put the details on screen. And it's a really warm, cozy jacket, so it's a day to brighten me up in terms of colour and warm me up in terms of thickness of yarn. Now you may wonder why it's called the Not Quite Enough Yarn podcast, especially if I do a quick tour of cupboard number 3, cupboard number 1, and behind me here is cupboard number 2. But I rarely have enough for a complete garment, and in fact this one's a good case in point because these are different shades of Noro and this is a different variety of Noro. But I like to put things together. Not everything is as over the top as this, please be assured. I'm usually much more sedate and conservative. But yeah, so I like to put things together in colour blocks, in stripes, in fades and all of that, to try and make garments out of what I've got. Because all of this year, in fact more than this year, I've been on a yarn diet. I have not bought any yarn since November 2017. This doesn't mean I haven't acquired yarn, because people have very kindly given it to me, but I haven't actually bought any for over a year. That's the first time that's ever happened. And I would say I feel proud of myself, but I only had 2 cupboards at the beginning of the year, and now I have 3 and some boxes. So maybe next year I should buy yarn, because then I won't get as much. There's a twisted logic there, but given the way this year's gone, who knows. At the end of the month, I am going to do a year tally of meters used and meters gained, and check my progress that way. Now, I've not been buying yarn, but I have been buying patterns. And why not? I blame this first one entirely on Shauna from Shauna's Stitches, as she has been singing the praises of this particular item. So thank you very much, Shauna. I look forward to making it. And it is the Northeasterly Blanket. Now, as you can see, I print everything up in black and white, so I will put a proper colour picture from the designer on screen. And it's the Northeasterly Blanket by Skenanigans, better known or otherwise known as Melissa Alexander Loomis. And it's a join as you go shawl, so it's made in strips with a bit of a chevron pattern, and then you join them together as you go, so no ends to weave in, all very civilised. Now I know Shauna is making hers out of her mini skeins that she's got in a yarn advent calendar, and it's looking really good as she's putting it all together. I'm not sure whether I'm going to use scraps or what I'm going to do with this, but I just really like the pattern, so I thought I would have that. Don't know when I'll start it, but there we go. The other pattern I've bought is thanks to, and apologies because I didn't take any notice of who it was on Instagram, but it was one of the test knitters for this pattern. And this is the Contour by Jamie Hoffman. And again, I'll put the designer's picture on here so you can get a good view of it. And it's just a really interesting construction of cardigan. Do you call it cardigan, jacket? Either way, it has brioche around the collar and the hem, but it has this unusual shaped piece. I'll stick a picture in here. That's done with short rows and just looks interesting enough to be interesting to knit, but not so weird and wacky that you can't wear it outside of the house like this. So I'm looking forward to that. Now I don't know when I'm going to start it because I have a cardigan to finish for my sister, which is very nearly done. I have a friend who's due to have a baby at the end of February, and I've got a couple of things in the pipeline for them, and some other things already on the hook and on the needles. So it might be a little while before I start this, but the designer very kindly offered a discount for people buying it in the first week, and I took advantage of that. So thank you for that, Jamie, and I look forward to making this when I get a chance. Now I'm not sure yet what yarn I'm going to use. I'm quite a large person, and so I need quite a lot of the main colour, and I have not quite enough yarn, see what I did there, to have everything in one colour for the main. Now I have a couple that are very similar, and what I might do is just a bit of a striping mechanism on that, but I think as long as I have a really strong contrast where I need it to be, I think that will work. So I'm going to experiment with a few things from the stash, and we'll go from there. Now I've been doing Vlogmas this month, so this month's podcast proper will be pretty much exclusively on the yarn and crafty stuff. So if you're interested in any of the other stuff in my life, and bless you if you are, there's absolutely no need for you to be, but I know some of you are, and I'm grateful. And I love watching the Vlogmas podcast from other podcasters as well, and seeing their lives away from the knitting. I just find it fascinating. So if you're as nosy as me, is basically what I'm saying. All of that stuff is over on the Vlogmas podcasts. I haven't done one every day because there hasn't always been anything to say, and I did a little bit of travelling and I wasn't in a position to upload videos. But they should all be on this channel. So if you're interested, by all means go and have a look. If you're not, I completely understand, because this is all about the yarn, and I get that. So here we go. I have nearly finished my sister's sweater, so I hope to be able to show you that next. And we'll see how the rest of the month pans out. Right, here is my sister's jacket. Ta-da! Now the eagle-eyed among you may notice my deliberate mistake. When you're doing cables, there are two things that can go wrong. You either don't twist on the right row, so you have a cable that's too short or too long, or you twist in the wrong direction. And I had them going right below the pockets, and then when I'd done the first side I realised that I'd made a mistake. So I just evened it up on the other side, because basically, as you can see here, this should be symmetrical, and it's not. But it's symmetrical across the whole thing. I don't know that Bev will even notice, and if she does, I don't really care. Sorry Bev, but I don't. I've left that marker in because the last time you saw this I'd done the back and I was up to there on the first front. So whole thing is now blocked, finished, sewn together, and I'm really pleased with it. So the pattern, the basic pattern, is from the Ann Budd Knitter's Handy Book of Sweater Patterns, and it's her modified drop shoulder pattern. Now her patterns seem to be quite deep in the sleeve, so it is quite baggy in this area, but this is a jacket being made for kind of dog walking, probably for having other clothes underneath it, so it doesn't matter that it's not a particularly fitted item. I made the, what size was it? I know I couldn't get exact gauge, so I had to kind of fudge it slightly. I sort of went up a size, but for down a number of stitches per inch, something like that. But last time my sister was here I tried the back against her and it fitted, so fingers crossed, and hopefully you'll have a bit of footage of her wearing it a little bit later on. Yeah, so the Ann Budd sweater pattern, modified drop shoulder. The cables came from the Norah Gaughan cable source book, which is incredibly useful and I like it very much. One of the things I particularly like about this, and I think I've mentioned it before, is that she gives you the pattern for a cable, but she then tells you what the stocking stitch equivalent is. So when you're trying to match, as I was here, fronts to back, I know that I needed to increase 5 stitches to fit this cable into the same size on the back, if that makes sense. So really useful from that point of view. Modifications, the main one really is the pockets, and I completely forgot about pockets until I was a little way up the first front, and then I remembered I was going to put them in. Ordinarily I would knit the pocket lining, so that's at the back here, leave it on a spare bit of thread or a spare needle. When I get to the right place in the sweater, I would put the corresponding number of stitches onto a spare needle and knit up from the pocket lining. Because I had forgotten to do that, and I didn't know how much yarn I was going to have, remember the name of the podcast, lovely people, I did a provisional cast on and worked from that into the body of the sweater and just did some finishing rib on the front. I don't think I'm explaining this very clearly, but basically you're making a back, you're making a front, and you're kind of matching the two. I didn't have quite enough yarn as I was doing the pocket linings last, which is why they start off with the teal at the top and then they go into the darker blue. So from the front it doesn't look too bad, but as you go further down you can see that there's the darker colour here. The yarn, the teal, is Debbie Bliss Rialto Aran, and there's no colour name, but it is number 21211, and the edgings and trimmings and cuffs and so forth are in Drops Big Merino. Again, no name, but it's number 17. I had 10 balls of the Debbie Bliss, and how many yards? And we have 80 meters per 50 gram balls. And I had 3 balls of the Drops Merino, and that has 75 meters per 50 gram ball. And I have this much left of the teal and this much left of the navy. So a little bit of yarn chicken being played, but generally got away with it. When I initially bought this yarn, it was to make something for myself, and I did have, I think I've got some cream coloured Aran in the drops yarn, and I think I was going to do blue, cream, and then the teal. But to be honest, this looks much better than that would have done. It is pretty much a replica of the jacket that I quite often wear, that I had made for my sister, and then she gave it back to me when she lost weight. So this is smaller. I think this is a 46-inch bust. Again, it's quite baggy for her, but that's what she wanted. I can take this progress keeper off now before it pulls any more stitches, because we are done. And I'm very happy with it. I just hope she is too. Certainly when she saw the back and a bit of the front, she liked it. So let's hope that the rest doesn't disappoint. I need to fold the collar over because obviously there's a wrong side where you pick up the stitches. All I did for that was pick up around the neckline as you would for any collar, and just knitted straight in 1 by 1 rib. She wanted it zipped rather than a button band. So all I did was I picked up the stitches, and then I'm going to move my head out the way so hopefully it will focus. And I did one of my kind of default stitches. We all have ones that we go to, and mine is 1 row knit, 2nd row knit 1, purl 1, and just repeat. Actually, seeing through this, you can see me through it. I've just realised you can, if you look at my neck, which I wouldn't normally recommend, but it's not the densest of fabrics. But it is a very soft yarn, and I think it will be quite warm. So, hoping she likes it, because it won't fit me if she doesn't. That sounds a bit cold, doesn't it? I'm really happy with how it's turned out. It blocked out very nicely, as you'd hope with 100% merino, but it has done. So the cables are showing up pretty well. With regard to the yarn, with the Debbie Bliss more than the drops, it's quite loosely spun, which meant it was quite splitty when I was knitting it. I like quite pointy sticks, so quite sharp. Maybe that made the situation worse, but it was something that would split quite easily, and a few times I had to drop down a couple of rows where I noticed a stitch where I had kind of half the yarn sticking out the front and had to go down, pick it up and work back up again. So yeah, I mean, it's a small price to pay because it is so lovely and soft. It's a really nice yarn. The whole garment has a nice feel to it. The drops feels equally nice, slightly tighter spun, so it didn't feel quite as splitty. And I think that's all I have to say. She's taking it home with her later today. Like I say, I'll hopefully get some footage of her trying it on and wearing it. And we're all good. And it's a finished object. It feels like a while since I've had a significant finished object, like a whole garment. So very pleased with that. Well, an update on my sister's cardigan. She likes it very much. Fitted pretty well. The sleeves were kind of bracelet length, and that's okay because she normally pushes her sleeves up, so that's fine. But the more we looked at it, the more it looked as if one sleeve was longer than the other, and I was in disbelief over this because I knew that when I blocked the sleeves, they had been blocked to the same layout of pins. So even if I'd gone a couple of rows over or something, they blocked through to the right shape. So this is so odd. So when she took it off again, I compared the sleeve seams and they were identical. Then my niece's boyfriend tried it on to show that they were actually both the same, and sadly we realised the problem appears to be my sister rather than the cardigan. I can't unpick her, that's too great a job for my skill set. So that's where we're at. She's happy with it. Like I say, she rolls the sleeves up anyway, so even if one is longer than the other, it won't stay that way because she'll push them up. So yeah, she was happy with that. Another small finished object for you. and this is a pair of slippers. Now those of you who kindly watched my 2 not quite about yarn episodes when I had some time off work in September may recall that I made a pair of slippers for myself. I was going to a retreat which involved not wearing shoes for 3 days, and I didn't want to get cold tooties, so I made myself some slippers. And my friend saw them and took a bit of a shine to them, or at least, as I'm saying this to you, I hope she did, because I've made her a pair. So if she was taking the mickey or, you know, just being polite, tough luck, mate. Sorry. The cat will sleep in them if you don't. Yeah, so a pair of slippers. This is my own pattern. It's a free pattern on Ravelry if anyone's interested. And it's called Modular Slipper with Ribbed Cuff. So if you have a look on my projects page or just search for that, you'll see it on there. It's really, really simple. Now this was made, these were made, there are 2 of them, in Noro Blossom. I think that yarn's been discontinued now. It's a bulky weight yarn, a chunky weight. The original pattern is for double knitting weight yarn. I kept with the same needle size, which is a 4mm, but I reduced the stitch count slightly to allow for the thicker weight. When I made the slippers for myself in September, I stuck to the original pattern, but I have larger than average feet and my mate Mandy doesn't, so I reduced it slightly. So in essence, you start off with a mitre square, which is this sort of base of the foot here and halfway up the sides. And that starts in the original pattern with a square, starts with 59 stitches. I just took it down a couple of stitches just to bring the size down a little. The spots you can see are sock stop, the sticky stuff that I put on so that it's non-slip. So after you've done the main square, you then do a half square, which becomes the toe. Then you pick up from the cast on edge of the initial square and do short rows to make this piece here, and then you just join those stitches into a loop, pick up the corner one from your small square, which might show better in this one because the colours are more contrasting, and then knit round in rib for as long as you want. And what I did for this was just 4 rows, knit 1, purl 1, rib. But after the 4th row, I then did a double decrease. I did a double decrease in the centre just to give it a nice shape, because there's no point having slippers to keep your feet warm if you've then got a draft coming down here. So hopefully she'll like these. By sticking to the bulky weight yarn but still with the 4mm needle size, it makes quite a nice dense fabric. I was making these at knit night last night, and someone asked if I would felt them, and I really don't need to because it is such a dense fabric with this Noro Blossom. So I'm hoping she likes these. We've had a few cold days so far, and at one point her main fire wasn't working, so she was a bit chilly. And then she sent me a picture of her cat in front of the fire waiting for it to be switched on. So like I say, the cat will like these, even if Mandy doesn't in particular. So yes, another finished object. It used about 80 grams of yarn. They're 50 gram balls, the Blossom, which is about 140 metres. So it's quite a handy little pattern, like I say. Very simple to work. It's one of those that looks more complicated than it is because of the mitre works and the stripes that you get. But quite cosy, quite comfortable. Being garter stitch, quite stretchy, so quite flexible on size. And I hope she likes them. And it's another finished object, albeit another small one, but an FO is an FO. Right, lovely people, another finished object. Who can believe it? And a very similar colour to the old one, actually, to the previous one rather. This is a shawl. And you can see here it's very obviously a shawl. It's quite a good size. Not as big as I was expecting. I thought I was making another Faroese shawl like the yellow-green one that I quite often wear in the podcast. and I had started off on the same size needle and with a similar number of stitches, but this just shows the difference that a different yarn can make. So to talk you through it, the yarn is John Arbon Organic Merino Lace Weight, and I am holding that double with a thread weight yarn, which is Fibre Spates Infinity Silk. So the sort of greeny tealy colour is the John Arbon, and then the fleck you see running through is a very pale blue, it's a sort of sky blue, and that's the silk. Now my initial idea was that the yarn would run out before I'd finished, because you'll notice I had enough yarn. Oh my goodness. I didn't think I was going to. So the idea was that the silk would be a sort of continuity between the different colours that I was running through. But I had enough yarn, so who knew? And what I did, following on from the Faroese shawl that I'd made before, which was based on the Leftovers Faroese pattern, and I'll put the details on screen, I cast on kind of 300 odd stitches. What I did first of all was I had a look in this book, which is 50 fabulous knitted borders. They're not just regular knitted borders, they are fabulous knitted borders, and that's by Rita Weiss. Now with all knitted borders, a lot of them are made long way, so you start off with just a few stitches and then you work sort of sideways on, if you like, and then pick up. That's not what I wanted. I wanted a border that I could have the beginning as my cast on edge. So I had a look in here and found some borders that work on that principle. So I started off with a multiple of stitches. Oh, I've got a loose end there, that's very poor. I can sort that out. So I started off with a multiple and did the border. Now this is where I made a mistake, because I miscalculated when I made the border, and basically was a few rows in before I noticed, and frankly couldn't be bothered to go back and frog it. I know. I was going to say don't judge me, but I'm judging myself on that one, but it's a decision I've made, so I'm the one who's going to have to live with it. So that means that we have a slightly odd looking bump there, and that's why I gave it its name, because that reminded me of the notches that you get on paper sewing patterns, so I called this Buenos Noches. Yeah. So I did the border. Then I decided, once that was done, that I wanted a central panel in seed stitch. Faroese shawls have a central panel. They're not quite pointed at the bottom. They have a slightly tapered shape. So a seed stitch or moss stitch central panel. And I was initially going to just work the rest plain. And as you can see, it didn't take long before I got bored. Funny that. Amazing I couldn't predict it. So all I did was these horizontal lines of ribs. So we've got decrease, yarn over, knit one, yarn over, decrease. Decreases facing opposite directions. And I would do 20 rows of that, then 20 rows of stocking stitch, then 20 rows just making sure I line them up. So that's what's created this pattern. After I'd done about 100 rows, I did a few decreases on the central panel because it does taper up slightly. So you can see we've got fairly straight for 100 rows, and then it starts to taper in. Now a true Faroese design would be bigger because it's big enough to kind of tie around the waist. Also you'd have decreases here, so it's quite a curved shape, so it sits nicely over the shoulders. I didn't do that. I just carried on decreasing every right side row against the centre panel and against the edge, just with 3 stitches of garter stitch on the edge to keep it straight. So that was that. I'd put some beads into the border. I didn't bother looking to, I'm going to try and focus that, is that any better? I didn't bother trying to, I'll take my face out of it, that might help. Yeah, there we go. I didn't try and make a pattern of the beads, I just picked up randomly from a pot, so they're a bit kind of mishmash, but they give it a little bit of weight and a bit of sparkle. So that's that. I used most of the ball of the John Arbon. Again, I was using it double, had just a little bit left. I think I've got about 7 grams left of the, I had 2 skeins. I'll put the weights on screen because I've gone blank, because it's December and it's a busy time of year and all of that. So yeah, I know I've got 7 grams left, so I used most of the yarn, but I've finished and it's all the same colour. I don't know what's happening to me. It's a very lightweight shawl. It was on 3.5 or 3.75mm needles. Very lightweight, but quite warm. It's merino and silk, so it's, you know, nice fibres there. So quite warm but very light. Like I say, it's not as big as I'd originally thought it would be, and my Faroese that you often see me wear comes down to about here and is longer. But I like it. It'll be a good round the shoulder job, and very pleased with how it's turned out. I've got plans in place for what I'm going to do with the rest of the silk and the other yarns that I was going to put into this shawl, but I consider that a successful finished object. So there we go, my own design based on the Faroese shawl, the leftovers Faroese. Very simple lace pattern. Once it's blocked out, that shows up quite nicely. A few beads on the hem, and yeah, just a really simple knit. Did it on a train, did most of it on a train, and we're done. Right, I was going to say Santa has been very kind to me, but actually it's my friends and family. Praise and credit where it's due, because these are the lovely people who've bought me some stuff. So I hope this doesn't seem too much like a gloat fest. Just showing you the knitting related stuff that people very kindly gave me for Christmas. And Denise from our knitting group, she makes lotion bars, so she gave us one of those, but also, and I'm hoping you can see that okay, a beautiful stitch marker as well. So she very kindly put that together for us, so that's really kind, so thank you, Denise. Now, when I went to Bath with himself earlier in December, we went to a couple of yarn shops, and in wool we got, he bought me these 2 yarns. So they are both Delhi Silk 4-ply, 50% silk, 50% merino. This one is called Jade, and this is Mint Julep, and I just think together they look absolutely beautiful. Sticking on the merino silk line, when we went to a yarn story, got this skein of beautifulness, and I hope you can see that. It's grey with flecks of colour. We've got all sorts from purples to yellows and greens. We've got some blues in here. Absolutely lovely, and this is also 50% merino, 50% silk, so it feels absolutely wonderful. So I was very spoilt on the yarn front on our trip to Bath. I also received some little clip things for holding pieces together when you sew them together. I've stuck them already in my notions boxes, so so they're there. But lots of books. Now some of these, sorry, just knocked the tripod. Some of these have been around for a little while, so we're not necessarily looking at the newest, most fashionable books on the block, but I'm very grateful to have them, because they're ones that I've been thinking about for a while, so this is great. So I'll go through them pretty quickly. You know I like my stitch directories, and we have the Japanese Knitting Stitch Bible, and just full of the most intricate, exciting, wonderful designs. So that is, well, it's yarn porn to me. So yeah, a few patterns in here as well, but predominantly a stitch directory. We have the Essential Guide to Colour Knitting Techniques. This is by Margaret Ratcliffe, and lots of stuff in here, from stranded colour work to intarsia to textured. I've barely touched the surface of glancing through this, but there is a lot of stuff in here to look at. So very exciting book. Again, some nice patterns in there as well. So looking forward to working my way through this. The Amy Herzog Knit to Flatter. Something I've been looking at for a while, and her whole ethos about making things that knit well, and her online patterns that do that. Just really interested in how it all works. There are patterns in here, but it's about tailoring them to suit individual people and individual body shapes. So loving that one. Now this one I think is relatively new, and this is Design Doubles. Now I came across some patterns on Ravelry which looked pretty interesting. So this is by Toby Roxanne Barmer, and the reason why it's Design Doubles is for each pattern you have a shawl and you have a sweater using the same stitch patterns. So some great stuff in here, some really interesting texture work, colour work, so some nice patterns in there. Looking forward to, there's a couple in there I've already thought, oh yes, I'd like to have a go at those. There's the Beginner's Guide to Writing Knitting Patterns. Now I know that I have written knitting patterns in the past and have had them published, but I think it does no harm to go back to basics and to make sure that if I am writing them, I'm doing them properly. So again, looking forward to reading this and working my way through it. Now this next one isn't exclusively knitting. Nordic Crafts. So it's got a couple of knitting things in, but it's also got sewing, stitch work, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, felting, it's got all sorts of things in it, so lots of great stuff in there to have a go at. And the last of the books, another stitch directory, the alternate stitch directory, and a lot of it's colour work in here rather than textural stuff, but there are some pretty fab things, so all just a bit marvellous. So lots to play with, lots of ideas, weird and wacky stuff you don't normally see. So looking forward to trying some of these out. And before I finish, some other yarn that I got. My sister kindly bought me these. I think I've got a wonky camera. Oh, hello. Right. These are for drumming related activities. Red and black sock yarn. So Yang Yarwol sock yarn. And I may well combine that with the alternates directory, because I know that's the back of the book. I know there are some skull and crossbones and those kind of patterns that would work really well with the colours and with the drumming themes. So super excited. Those were my lovely Christmas presents, so thank you to my friends and family, and I hope you were pleased with any gifts that you got, knitting related or otherwise. But soft, what light from yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Enid is the sun. Enid is kindly demonstrating another finished object. It's probably easier if Enid does it than I do it, because otherwise I'd be up, down, oh, like a bridesmaid's knickers. Anyway, Enid is demonstrating the finished Come Here cardigan, which I'm calling Come Here to the Side because of the asymmetrical nature of it. So this started with the many cones of Texair yarn that I bought last year, and they are lace weight, almost thread. this is the Texair Dynasty Silk. I was using 4 at a time and holding those with Little Knitting Company's Top 50, which is a 50% acrylic, 50% mohair mix. So to run you through the colours, the Texair I had coral, pale blue, grey and a sort of undyed natural colour. The Little Knitting yarn was pastel variegated, so blues, pinks and whites as a rule. And I had the 5 strands together. I did a swatch to see, to get a fabric that I liked. And once I'd done that, I then had a look on Ravelry to see what I could make with that gauge. And it turned out about 21 stitches to 4 inches. That was on 3.5mm needles. And came up with the Come Here pattern by Drops. And if you look at the Come Here pattern by Drops, you'll think, well, it looks nothing like that. Because I used it for the basic numbers, but I made a lot of modifications. So the first and most obvious one, excuse me madam, is that I made it an asymmetrical cardigan. Oh, we're a bit wonky. Here we go. Yes, I made it asymmetrical. The initial pattern is a straight down the middle jacket. I wanted an asymmetrical pattern, so that's what we've got. Now, as I was making it, it became obvious to me just how wide the neck was on the pattern. And you can see, even though I've altered it, and I did that with short rows, and that featured in an earlier podcast, it's still quite wide. Either that or Enid has got a very narrow neck, not sure. In hindsight, if I'd realised how wide it was, I would have found a different pattern, because actually this is very asymmetrical. Normally you'd expect this button band to be kind of 2 or 3 inches over this way, so nearer here, but we're going with this, so that's all good. So large moss stitch slash seed stitch panel. I redid the neckline once I'd realised how narrow it was. That started off in garter stitch, but I made that seed stitch as well. I worked down to the sleeve division and then I did the sleeves. I knew that the coral yarn I only had 1 cone of, and I wanted everything as far as possible to be the same. So did the sleeves first. I made these slightly longer than the original pattern. The original one has them finishing about here, sort of bracelet length I guess, 3/4. But I wanted a full length sleeve, so I just carried on down, and again just a few rows of moss slash seed stitch at the bottom. Please excuse my croaky voice. That done, I then carried on with the body, working down from the sleeve division. I had to change colours again. I ran out of the Top 50, the mohair mix. I knew I would. I only had 1 skein of that, which is 1,000 metres, so I knew that wouldn't be enough. And I added in, and I don't know if the light will show it, but you can actually see the line here. And I added in a plain white mohair mix of the same sort of weight. Now at about the same time, and this won't come as a shock, I was starting to get bored. It was just knitting down, bit of seed stitch, but I was getting a bit fed up. So I decided to add in a slight pattern. If I turn Enid round, excuse me madam, you may be able to see that. I'll put some photographs in as well. So Enid, I've started doing sort of diamond points, you can see it there, that's good. To transition it from stocking stitch to moss stitch. And that actually worked pretty well for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it made it a bit more interesting to knit, but it also meant that when I ran out of yarn with the cones that I was using, I could just stop. I wasn't trying to work out how much I would need for a border, because the whole thing was in seed stitch. As I'd worked down, I'd put in a false seam, and I quite often do that when I'm doing in the round stuff. It just gives a bit of kind of shape and definition. It's just reverse stocking stitch, But as I got towards the bottom, I just stopped doing that to make the border all the same. So there we go. It's a cropped sort of length. Normally I go for longer. I normally go for hip length. But as I say, I was getting very bored. Also, I was kind of running out of the yarns. Wouldn't really have had enough for another kind of many inches. And this length works for me if I'm wearing my work dresses, my plain little black numbers. Then this works quite well if I just want something to kind of throw on over that's semi-tidy. So this is the come here to the side. And yes, if I were doing it again, there are things I'd do differently. As I said, I'd made this side wider, this side narrower. In hindsight, probably would have been best if I'd used a different pattern as my base before I started messing around. But as an exercise in modification, I'm quite happy with it. So yeah, we're okay. Thanks, Enid. You're doing a cracking job. Well, you gorgeous individuals, that's pretty much it. I mean, you've had 3 finished objects from me this month. That's pretty rare. I'm going to cherish that because that doesn't happen very often. Thanks again to everyone for watching. I can't believe I've now been doing the podcast a year. I started in January. We're now at the end of December. Just amazing. And that's all thanks to you guys for all of your contributions, your thoughts, your questions, and your involvement, your commenting. That I know I go on about it, but it is genuinely heartfelt. I'm so grateful. Thank you. I said that I would do totals for the end of the year. Of course, the Come Here jacket, cardigan that I've just shown you, is a huge number of meters because you're dealing with 5 strands of yarn held together. And I do measure everything in meters. When I buy it, I add it in meters. When I use it, I do the same thing. So that is over 5,000 meters of yarn because of all the different cones and the mohair all added together. So I have written down my totals for the year. Yarn used, 16,814 meters. That's alright, that's not bad. I'm happy with that. Yarn acquired, 24,174 meters. I haven't included the little bits and pieces that I get with Let's Knit magazine. They tend to be small balls of acrylic for use in toys. I haven't counted those. But everything else that people have been kind enough to give me, that have been donated to my cause, that's all included. Now, over 11,000 of those meters comes from my friend who died and the stash that her husband kindly sent to me. So that's the reason why it's such a huge acquisition. Having said that, that still makes it about 13,000 meters acquired. My sister gave me a load of stuff as well. So I have very generous people that I know and I'm grateful to them. But yeah, those are my totals for the year. So those are the yearly totals. Amazing. I was asked by a viewer what was happening with the yarn diet as we move into the next year, because initially this was a year-long yarn diet. And despite those numbers, I haven't bought any yarn. I've been given yarn and I'm very grateful, but I haven't actually bought any. So in my head, I've been on a yarn diet. Now, looking at those numbers and the amount I've acquired, looking at the fact that at the beginning of the year I had 2 cupboards and I now have 3, I think the yarn diet needs to continue. But it's been a long time. Been a long, lonely time. Sorry. There are always songs in here. Sometimes they come out of it. I need to keep on not buying yarn. But I've not always enjoyed that. Sometimes it's been very difficult. So I have decided that It's predominantly a yarn diet for the following year. So 2019, more of the same, with 2 exceptions. The first is that I'm going to go to a yarn festival, and that's probably going to be Unravel, which is in February, and that's in Surrey in southern England. So I will be going to a yarn festival because I've got to get my fix somehow. And the other exception is a question mark one, but if there's another Tits Out Collective batch of yarns, I may make a purchase, partly because I think the idea behind it all was excellent, partly because the causes helped have been really worthwhile, and partly because the yarns were so pretty. So I may make a Tits Out Collective purchase as well if that happens again this year. I believe there is an intention for it to happen, so I'll decide on the time, but I'm kind of giving myself permission to buy something then if it happens. I've loved doing the podcasts. I've loved doing the Vlogmas as well. Actually, you guys, I owe you a huge thanks because you are the reason why I haven't bought yarn. Because the thought of having to come on here and say, oh yeah, well I'm doing a year-long yarn diet, but I've bought blah, 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 blah. You've kept me on the straight and narrow, and I'm grateful for that. Having said that, if anyone else was meant to be on a yarn diet and has bought, that's fine. This is your journey. I'm on mine, you're on yours. That's absolutely fine. I'm not sitting in judgment on anyone who's bought yarn. I love yarn. Yarn is pretty, and I love yarn dyers, and we need to keep supporting them. And this is a bit of a dilemma in me, but it's what I'm managing to get around because I just have so much stuff. So, more of the same from next year. The next podcast will be up at the end of January. Don't know what I'll have made. There should be some baby stuff in there because that's definitely next priority. I've got a few things in my queue that I'd like to get cracking on. I've done a lot of knitting this year, and I think one of my next bigger projects, garment projects, will be a crocheted cardigan. I've got some yarn teed up. Shock news, I may have enough of the same colour. Sorry, I feel like I'm letting you all down when I say things like that. So a crochet cardigan may well be in my immediate future, but I do have this baby stuff to make first. So, and here's to all the patterns that I haven't yet seen that I'll find online and think, oh, that's pretty, I'd really like to make that. Because actually that's what it's about. It's about the new stuff coming out. It's about the exciting stuff that's happening in our community. For a lot of people it's new yarns. I'm abstaining still. New patterns, I should abstain. I'm not going to yet. I am a weakened human person, and I only have so much willpower. Actually, I've got lots of willpower. It's won't power I don't have. So the voice is giving up, so I will finish this here. But I wish you all a very happy new year. I hope that life is treating you well. Whatever your 2018 was like, I hope 2019 is better. Thank you for spending some of your time with me. I'll be back at the end of the month, and all the very best to all of you. Keep crafting, keep finding joy in what you do, and take very good care. Thank you. Bye-bye.